This is where President Trump seems so politically tone deaf. I mean, this is what we're talking about, saying, oh, you know what, it's worth it to me. You know, I'm not actually taking part in the midterm elections. But just look at this. Just look at these numbers here. Is the Iran war worth higher gas prices? And I will note, this obviously, this poll wasn't conducted in the last 24 hours, so this doesn't even take into account the most recent peak. Take a look here. 65% of Americans, we're talking 2 in 3, say no, no, no. The Iran war is not, in fact, worth the higher gas prices. So Donald Trump is here on one end saying, you know what it is, and the American people are here on the other end completely disagreeing with him on this issue of the Iran war and higher gas prices. The American people feel the pain at the pump, and they very much disagree with the President of the United States.
Clearly, the blame for the war kind of on the president, but is it wider than that? Is the GOP also getting hit as we march towards the midterms?
This is exactly right. You know, Donald Trump isn't technically on the ballot come November, but you know who is on the ballot in the midterm elections? The Republicans in Congress. And if there's any fantasy that is out there that somehow what is going on, the blame that's being put on the White House, won't funnel its way down ballot, well, I'm here to extinguish that false belief. Because just take a look here. Okay, and again, this is before the most recent uptick in the gas prices. Blame which party for higher gas prices during the war? Blame the Democrats? Just 27% blame the Democrats. Look at this lion's share. Again, this 2 in 3 number. 2 in 3 Americans blame Republicans if forced to choose between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Which party do they blame for the higher gas prices? They blame the Republican Party. So all that pain that Americans feel that they are putting the blame on Donald Trump, that idea that it won't funnel its way down the ballot, as I said at the beginning, it is a false belief. It simply put isn't true. Republicans, it is quite unlikely that they will be able to escape the blame that is being put on the White House when it comes to the ballot box come this November. If the gas prices remain where they are, remember, they're going up.
Right, and it's not surprising. They hold the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
They hold everything. They hold everything, Sarah. They hold all the levers of power in Washington. No wonder they're the ones that are getting blamed.
Yeah, which is not unusual. If that had been flipped and the Democrats on the same thing, it would be the same issue. I am curious about what happens with the feelings towards inflation as a whole, because all of these things hit your pocketbook. How do Americans feel about who's to blame for inflation?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sarah. Look, this is part of a larger equation, right? The reason that Donald Trump won a second term in 2024 was because of inflation. Now the higher gas prices are disproportionately affecting and making inflation go higher. And just take a look. This is just nutter butter. This is movement that kills parties, that kills their electoral aspirations. Trusted more on inflation. You go back to October of 2024. The reason Donald Trump won that second term in the White House was because he was more trusted on inflation by 6 points over Kamala Harris. The number one issue, the cost of living, inflation, is still the number one issue when it comes to Americans. But who do they trust now more when it comes to inflation? Look at this in the cost of living. Most recent Fox News poll, Democrats trusted by 10 points on inflation, a complete switcheroo from what we saw in 2024. Remember, inflation was what kicked Joe Biden and the Democrats out of power, kept Kamala Harris from getting to the White House. Now, this same issue may in fact be what turns Republicans out of power in Washington, D.C., at least when it comes to the House, maybe the Senate as well. If these numbers hold, it's very hard to imagine that Republicans are able to hold on to the House of Representatives when on the number one issue, the Democrats are trusted by 10 points and a complete switcheroo from where we were just a year and a half ago. These are the numbers that Democrats absolutely love and Republicans absolutely have to despise. And more than that, it is the gas prices that will continue to make these numbers for Democrats go up in terms of their lead on the number one issue. And it's the big reason why Democrats at this point should be favored to take back the U.S. House of Representatives.
It was the number one issue in this past presidential election. They gave their support to Donald Trump. And like you said, that is a huge switch around.
Look at these numbers on Israel, the net favorability. They're all negative. They're all negative. Ipsos, minus 10 points. Fox, minus 11 points. Marquette University Law School Law poll. Look at that, minus 20 points. Pew Research Center, minus 23 points. Negative, 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 negative. And Gallup earlier this year was also negative. We're not just talking about the Democratic base anymore. We're talking about the general electorate as well. The general electorate has turned against Israel. This is not just a left issue. It is an American issue when it comes to opinions on Israel.
What's the trend line here?
What's the trend line here? The trend line is unbelievable. Look at the trend line here. Compare this to Donald Trump's first term. At this point in Donald Trump's first terms, Israel's average net favorability.
Wow.
You go back here. Look at this. It was plus 51 points. Wow, Johnny says. Wow, Johnny says, because this is wow. Plus 51. It's minus 16 points in the average poll now. That is what, a 67-point shift against Israel in just 8 years. Israel used to be a consensus issue in American politics, and that was a pro-Israeli position. Now the consensus has actually shifted, and now when it comes to general electorate, it is a minus. Israel is now seen negatively, and we're seeing it in poll after poll after poll.
You just had this vote in the House where 100 Democrats voted against military assistance to Israel. How is that specific issue seen right now?
Yeah, you said wow, right? How about wow again? Take a look here. I never thought I'd see the day military assistance to Israel say U.S. should reduce or end it. Overall, 55% say they should reduce or end it. And it is true across the educational spectrum. 51% of non-college graduates, 62% of college graduates. So this isn't just an issue right among white liberals in Democratic primaries. No, no, no. This is true across the educational divide. Even when we are looking towards a general electorate, the majority of Americans believe that military assistance to Israel should either be reduced or ended.
Again, what the numbers are showing is we shouldn't just presume that opposition to Israel or aid to Israel is a political loser now.
Correct.
The numbers just don't seem to suggest that. There's a big Senate race in Michigan, right, for an open seat. There is one candidate who is seen as being more opposed to aid to Israel, Abdul Sayed. What are the prediction markets saying about that race?
Yeah, I think a lot of Republicans say, we want to run against Abdullah Sayed. We can beat him. Israel, one of the reasons, he's too far out of the mainstream. But take a look at the Kalshi prediction markets. Chance to win the Michigan Senate race. Look at this. El Sayed, as the lone candidate, 59% chance, the majority chance of winning that. And of course, this side still includes, he still has to beat Haley Stevens in Democratic primary. She's at 14%. Mike Rogers, the Republican, at 32% chance. So the idea necessarily that Abdullah Sayed is unelectable, completely false, because the bottom line is this. Israel as an issue is not the cudgel that I think that a lot of Republicans believe they can use in order to beat Abdullah Sayed or these other anti-Israel, or at least wanting to reduce aid to Israel candidates. 2028 New Hampshire GOP primary polls. You go back to February, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, was absolutely crushing Marco Rubio. Look at that, 53% the first choice. Marco Rubio was just down at 7%. Look at this race now, though. What was a 45-point margin or so, or 46-point margin, has now become just a 10-point margin. Woof, that is a closing of well over 30 points. Now Vance is at 36%, dropping like a rock. And look at Marco Rubio, up there, climbing up to Mount Washington, up to 26%. What wasn't a race in February has become very much a race right now, with the Secretary of State very much closing the gap between him and the Vice President of the United States.
This is February of this year?
This is February of 2026. Yes, it is February of this year. Just in 6 months' time, Marco Rubio has absolutely climbed out of the cellar, right behind the vice president. And as Johnny B was pointing out to me in the break, this is happening when J.D. Vance is making one of the biggest pushes of his vice presidency in terms of PR. It doesn't seem to be working in the Granite State.
All right, put this in some historical perspective, Harold.
Yeah, okay. So you see right here, you see a 10-point gap, right, between Rubio and Vance. Well, I wanted to look back in prior years to understand where were sitting VPs who eventually ran. How big were their leads in New Hampshire in the early primary polls, and compare that to Vance. So these are VP leads, early New Hampshire primary polls. Vance is up 10 points, as I mentioned. Al Gore was up 40 points at this point, and he barely won in New Hampshire, right? He barely won over Bill Bradley. How about George Herbert Walker Bush? He was up 26 points in the early primary polls, and of course, he had to come back and win New Hampshire after losing the Iowa caucuses. So this lead is historically small. You would expect a VP to be much more up in the early polls in New Hampshire, especially with a popular president within their own party, but that is not the case right now with J.D. Vance. He has a historically small lead for a VP, and a lead that has been closing very much closing over the last 6 months. This is probably the best polling data that Marco Rubio's received and probably the worst polling data that J.D. Vance has received ahead of 2028 so far.
Very quickly, what are the prediction markets saying?
What are the prediction markets saying? Well, this is part of a national picture. J.D. Vance was way up in January, chance to be the Republican nominee, 49% to 11%. But now look at the Kalshi prediction markets. They're again much closer now. Marco Rubio not just surging in New Hampshire, he also seems to be surging nationally when it comes to his chances to be the Republican nominee. J.D. Vance's 2028 bid looks to be a little bit of thin ice at this point. I feel like I'm in bizarro world, okay? Because the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and hope for a different result. And that is just simply put not been the case with President Trump in terms of the train has left the station and the American people have spoken. They hate these new tariffs. U.S. on new tariffs on imported goods. You know, you go back to November of 2024. Look, 52% of Americans favored him right after Donald Trump's election, 48% opposed. But then we entered the real world in tariffs and Americans saw the effects of them. What happened to the opposition to new tariffs? Up like a rocket. We're talking 63% of Americans now oppose the idea of new tariffs compared to just 37% who favor it. So the bottom line is this. The American people have seen what tariffs have done to the economy, and they simply put do not like it and have turned against the President of the United States, who, as I said, it feels like bizarro world because from a political standpoint, it is absolutely insanity that keeps trying to do something that the American people clearly very much do not like.
Bizarre world also because there is a red sun, but that's another.
Yeah, that's a whole thing.
All right.
Superman.
The president's approval rating, how has it been? Or how has it sort of mirrored the tariff situation?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, the tariffs were what set Donald Trump off on a pathway to nowhere, on a pathway to a presidency that is a dead end. Take a look at this. Trump's negative net approval rating. Every single poll since March 29, 2025, that is over a year ago, in fact, days in a row, it's 482 days in which every single poll that meets CNN standards for publication, Donald Trump has had a negative net approval rating. Well, what happened right around March 29, 2025? All polls just before Liberation Day 2025. It was the tariffs. It was the massive implication of those tariffs, the implementation of it, that, of course, many of them got overturned, that turned the American people once and for all against Donald Trump in his second term as president.
Went underwater just around Liberation Day, been underwater every day since. All right, how does the rest of the world feel about this?
Yeah, okay. So the rest of the world doesn't like it either. I mean, that's not much of a surprise, right? But still, it's notable, right? Net approval rating Trump on tariffs. Brazil, 51 points underwater. Canada, 65 points underwater. Mexico, 73 points underwater. Trump has been underwater so long on tariffs, both here and abroad, that the bottom line is this. It's almost like he is the Little Mermaid. He just doesn't even come up for air anymore.
And this could have a political impact in the other direction the president wants in some of these countries.
Exactly right. Take a look at Brazil. 51 points underwater there. Well, there's a presidential election going on there. Top chances to win the Brazilian presidential election. Lula, who President Trump does not like, he has now a 63% chance, while, in fact, Bolsonaro, who Trump very much likes, an ally, 25% chance. Donald Trump is killing his allies with these tariffs. Why is this Ossoff's America? And that is because John Ossoff is Hotlanta. That's what we're talking about when you're looking at the prediction market odds. Take a look here. Chance to be the 2028 Democratic nominee. You know, back in January 1, Gavin Newsom was the clear leader of the pack, according to Kalshi, 35% chance. John Ossoff was down at 5%. AOC was down at 10%. Look at where we are now. Gavin Newsom's numbers have absolutely tumbled in the Kalshi prediction markets. An 18% chance, still maybe the nominal leader, but look who is up like a Hotlanta rocket, up to a 16% chance to be the 2028 Democratic nominee. John Ossoff, the senator from the great state of Georgia. AOC right behind him at 15%. But the real mover, at least in terms of looking forward at this very early look, is John Ossoff, tripling his chances from 5%, actually more than tripling, to up to 16% chance now.
And there are other metrics too, right?
There are other metrics. I mean, one of the reasons why that John Ossoff is climbing in the Kalshi prediction markets is there's a lot of interest in John Ossoff, not just in Georgia, but nationally. What are we looking at here? Well, take a look here. Google searches for John Ossoff up 300% versus last July. That perhaps isn't so surprising, given, of course, he is running for re-election. But I will note, it's the most ever for him in a July. Most ever for him in July. So it's not just interest within Georgia, it is interest in Jon Ossoff nationally, and that is one of the reasons why he is, of course, making a lot of news, and also one of the reasons why he's climbing those Kalshi prediction markets is because he's making a lot of news.
And I noted he's running for re-election in Senate, and that re-election may be able to be something of a vaulting point for him.
Catapult off that re-election. I mean, just take a look at historic Dem performances. Georgia Dems for Senate this century. Look at this. The biggest win was Raphael Warnock back in 2022. He won by that race by 3 points. Look at how much Jon Ossoff was ahead in a recent Fox News poll. He was up 13 points. You carry Georgia, you put that into an electoral map, that makes the math much easier if you're a Democratic candidate running for United States Senate. You show you can win in a swing state, and then, of course, you give those spiels that have been going all over social media, which is one of the reasons why his Google searches are so high. You say, hey, this is a coalition that might actually work.
And there are, what, 77 million other reasons why?
Yeah, I would just say, look at this, 77 million, top fundraiser for Senate this century. Money is what makes a presidential bid go, and he's shown an ability to raise a lot of it, the top fundraiser this cycle.